This morning, we want to have a conversation on the reading culture as well as the literacy levels in Kenya. And to help us have that conversation, we're joined by Mrs. Muthoni Garland. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Kerubo.
Founder of the Story Moja Festival, which we will come and talk about a bit later. But let's get into it. And it's been said so many times, Kenyans don't read. Kenyans don't read. It's a song we hear every other day. First, I'd want to know, in your opinion, do you think we don't read?
I think there's a core group of readers. They're the ones that keep the shops open, the bookshops open.
Yes.
And that core group is increasing.
Okay.
But as a percentage of the population, it is simply not high enough. And that is what the concern is.
Well, why do you think that is so? Is it because of our education system, one that has, pushed us to become crammers? People who go to school and cram for the exam and then move on to the next phase of life?
That's only a very small part of the puzzle. There are many things that are wrong, and I'll just say the basic fundamental problem is that parents, and therefore teachers, students, the society as a whole, doesn't really understand the role of storybooks. So when you're a child and you're put in a school, the majority of Kenyans do not speak English at home or in their environment. So you're put in a school and you learn this foreign language. And you're not given any real assistance outside of the narrow borders of that classroom to actually practice the words. So I try and say, if you're learning a foreign language like French or Spanish, you do a lot of reading of that language so that you become familiar with it. Mm-hmm. Because the basis of literacy is words. If you understand words, you understand what they mean, you understand how to string them together into sentences, and sentences into paragraphs, into essays, or into narrative structures that work, then you become literate. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that from the time that the child is very young, they just don't get enough stimulation, enough learning from storybooks in order to become, articulate within the language. And without that articulation, the effects of the illiteracy, we see it in graduates who cannot write CVs, we see it in graduates who take loans that they find difficult to repay because they simply don't understand the loan terms. Mothers who are not able to raise their children in healthy ways because they don't understand the instructions they're given either by doctors, or if the child is unhealthy, to be able to articulate what the symptoms are. We've heard that from doctors. We've heard recently at a stakeholders meeting with business leaders, who were sharing the most appalling examples. A leading bank saying, we hire the top graduates in this country, and then we put them through a remedial training to teach them what a paragraph is. So imagine how that is holding us back as a society.
I see where you're coming from, but let me also come and be a parent, or think as a parent. Yeah. Yes, I send my child to school in the morning and, expect them to learn. And you say when they come back home, we should continue that conversation. But when they come back home, my agenda is really to try and push my child to speak mother tongue, right? So that's to make them whole in some sense, because we still hold on to tradition very, very closely to our hearts. So some parents might be of the thinking, might as well put them in school where they can learn English and Swahili. Then when we come back home, let's focus on Kikuyu, let's focus on Luo, let's focus on Luya, our mother tongue, so that they don't forget where they're from.
It's one of the challenges of being in a country where the majority of people are bilingual or trilingual, and this is not isolated to Kenya. It's a worldwide challenge. Mm-hmm. And ideally, yes, the children should learn, especially in areas that are not perhaps urban conurbations like Nairobi, where there's so many languages that you can't really teach in any one particular language. But ideally, the child could learn, should learn, I think, in their vernacular, at least in their formative years. Mm-hmm. And there are many examples of countries that do that around the world, where they first learn in their vernacular. Because if you imagine, if you're teaching a child a new word, so you're teaching them a word like word, if they understand that in their vernacular, when they go to school, all they're learning is how to spell it. But now what happens, you go to school, you first have to learn the concept of what does the word mean, translate it into your head in what it means in vernacular, and then you're taught again how to spell it. So you're going through this quite complicated process. But that does not negate the fact that reading, if you like, reading storybooks are for some parents, maybe to be simpler for them to think of them as textbooks for studying English. Because if you want to understand, you know, the language of instruction in this country, right or wrong, I'm not talking about the politics of that, the language of instruction, the language of business, the language of exams, you know, in order for you to make it, then do the best that you can, especially when the children are really young.
I was going to ask you,
where the basics start.
We're talking about storybooks. At what point then should I, you know, as a parent, introduce storybooks to our children?
I believe that parents should read with their child every single day for at least 10 minutes if they're really, really young, including when they're still, you know, in there, and continue to do that literally until the child is about 10. And at that point, the child then makes a choice whether to continue. You'd be surprised even older children enjoy that. But studies have shown that if you read with a child for 30 minutes for the first 6 years of their life, they jump a year in their competence. They jump a year, not just in English, but across all subjects. And the reason that happens is it goes back to literacy. If you understand words, you understand instructions, you're better at math, you're better at geography, you're better at history, you can write better essays, better compositions. And I don't mean better just in the sense of it looks nice or it sounds fancy or anything like that. It's just that it is clear communication. And the way the world is changing now, becoming this digital, highly globalized, highly competitive and creative world, then more than ever we need even to read even more storybooks, because what happens is we're all born with creative genes, and they're nurtured within, if we don't nurture them in the first sort of 8 years of our lives, then a lot of them sort of go defunct, you know, they they don't develop. And yet those are the genes that that allow to me a child of 20-something who then founds a company called Facebook, which within 7 years is as big as the GDP of Kenya. What is it so secret about Facebook that a Kenyan could not come up with? After all, we have very many software graduates, many software engineers, and I keep thinking what's holding them back is that ability to communicate clearly, the ability to articulate, the ability to dream, to imagine, you know, all the things which to me storybooks
give and portray. But then there's a larger percentage of us who really cannot afford storybooks. Larger percentage of us who, you know, are living day to day, paycheck to paycheck, you know, or your payment for today, waiting for tomorrow. How then do we go about reading storybooks in such a scenario?
There are some appalling things going on. Like, for instance, only 2% of Kenyan public primary schools have a library. Which means, you know, in the most vulnerable, the poorest children who really have no role models in terms of the reading culture and no access to books, you know, are the ones who really suffer the most. And the challenges around that is if you have a population like Kenya where there's such a dichotomy between the rich and the poor, or the middle class and the poor, because people don't like to call themselves rich, but it's such a relative term. But you have like 50% of the population can afford the private school or, you know, the academies and all that, and they're getting a pretty adequate education, if not good education. Then you have the 50% that are being held behind, because if you don't understand the basics, then you're just being held back. And that's why if you look at KCPE results, they haven't changed for the last decade. You know, the average grade in KCPE, the average score is still 250 points, which is nothing to, you know, to celebrate or to be happy about. But if you go to public schools, it's much lower than that, you know. And if you're talking about 50% of the population being left behind, I say that's why we're building higher and higher walls around our houses, because that child is just learning enough to know that they're not getting a fair shot in life. Because if you can't get the basics, how do you then continue? You'll never come out of poverty. You understand? And those, to me, for a country like this that is a pyramid in terms of its age structure, so many young people. I mean, we've got 50% of the population sort of under the age of 20.
Yes.
For me, it's an ingredient, if you like. If you look at worldwide studies, what are the key ingredients for civil war, social unrest, you know, things like that? It's when you have a very young population, huge economic disparity, and then you have poor education in the sense that people are not learning. Not just that they're in school, but
they're not
actually learning.
Yes.
So you have WESO reports come out every year and they get brushed aside. But you know the WESO report, do you know what it actually tests? It goes to a child, say in class 7, and says, read this paragraph. And the paragraph will say, my name is Jane, I am in class 7, I like history. And at class 7, 25% of the children in class 7 cannot read that. That's appalling. And then you get, you know, they go on to standard 8, and they finish, they do the exam, and they honestly will not continue on to high school, even if they had the resources, because they're just not prepared for it, you know? So you get 10 to 15% of the people leaving high school cannot continue.
Because they simply got the bare minimum and did not move on. So are we asking the government then to, you know, put up more libraries, put up more facilities? Are we asking schools to ensure that this is a must?
I am asking everybody to hold hands and really start libraries in schools, and go beyond starting libraries in schools. Ensure that those libraries are used. So Story Moja runs a program called Start a Library, where we've started 64 libraries over the past 3 years, which people tell me is good, but there are over 20,000 schools that need libraries. So tonight at the festival, we're actually launching what we're calling the Year 2 Start a Library campaign, where we're holding hands with first ladies of the counties, those who've elected to work with us, to say, let's start a program where we start the libraries. The program is very simple. We ask for public donations. When we get to 300,000 shillings, we start a library, and in the library we'll stock it with 1,000 books. We'll monitor it over a period of 1 year. We'll start book clubs, and we're asking the ministry, we're lobbying very hard at the ministry, please ensure the library time, the 30 minutes allocated every week that's supposed to be library time, is used as library time, not as, you know, curriculum catch-up, etc. We're also making presentations to PTAs and teachers to educate parents about the power of reading with your child. And if you can't read, because there are many parents who are not able to read, let the child read to you. You know, celebrate it with the child, so that the child sees that they have positive role models who are saying the right things around reading. We're inviting reading ambassadors. Come into schools with us, you know? And because when they see powerful role models, you know, Sauti Sol are reading ambassadors. We've got, you know, musicians, politicians, we've got people who are popular influencers. And we say, just come into the schools and read aloud to the children. Because when they see that an adult is willing to give up time in their busy schedule to read, it endorses, you know, endorses reading for them. We've
talked about, you know, bringing up children who read. This means we're starting at the age of maybe 3, 4, you know, for them to start reading. What about that adult, you know, who has not read much? You know, is there a hope? Can I start reading today? Will it make a difference? So, you know, it's a lost cause. I'm done. Moving on swiftly. Survive with the bare minimum, like you said.
It's always harder to convert people who are older, but I always say that it's up to you. You know, we're individuals, we're grown up, we have the power to make decisions over our lives. And if we take our lives as projects that need continuous improvement, then you can always, you know, start reading, and you will benefit a lot from reading. You can earn your own internal PhD in reading just by being dedicated to it. And the beauty these days, especially if you can afford digital gadgets, is that books are so accessible. So if you can afford a tablet, there is so much free literature available. And even like now, I tend to read on Kindle, because to try and access, I like to read African writers, and it's difficult to get access to African writers. The distribution is very expensive, and the range of authors available is phenomenal. You know, so I say it's up to you. But if you're a parent, especially if you're a parent of young children, I say even if you don't like to read so much, just hold up a book. But first of all, make sure your child, if they're under the age of 10, reads at least 25 books a year. Studies show that's the minimum number a child should read to be stimulated and to get, you know, to gain the absolute minimum in terms of understanding language. But if you're an adult and you can read, then what I would suggest is just get into a habit of holding the book up, and even if it's to chuckle after 2 or 3 pages, so that the child sees you reading, that will have a benefit. And then you might surprise yourself by actually enjoying it and wanting to. So have books around you instead of just loads and loads of other gadgets.
Someone here, Gakuro, says, hi, which books should we then buy for our 8 and 10-year-olds? You know, and that's what I was going to ask you. What literature then should we be reading? Are we reading fiction, non-fiction? Are we reading scholarly works? What are we pushing for?
I think it's very important to read books that interest you. So one of the challenges we have in the publishing industry is not enough books are written for boys or with boys in mind. So, you know, boys, what they like. Boys like engines. Boys like cars. Boys like rough, you know, a bit of rough play within the book. They'll go much further in terms of the plot. They want dangerous things to happen, you know, not just Cinderella type stories. Yes. So there's, you know, so we at Story Moja are working very hard in terms of developing books for boys. But there are so many books available. I mean, I think next week there's the book fair. There are over 1,000 books published every year for children. There's no shortage of books. The problem is the shortage of buyers of books to encourage those, you know, those who are writing to continue writing and the publishers to publish them.
So it should be a case of walking to a book center, a bookstore, you know, with your child, pick 2 or 3 books.
Absolutely.
And they try and see what works for them. If it doesn't work, hey, okay, let's move on to the next one.
There are so many books to choose from.
Many genres as well.
We've published a 12-year-old called Joseph Bokea, who's written a fantasy fiction novel.
Yes, we looked at him here on the Called Magic. Show.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, you know, and I say, if a 12-year-old can write that, every 12-year-old in Kenya should be able to articulate like that.
Yes.
And what happens, I take that book into high schools, and high school students can't read it. It's too sophisticated for them. The language, they look at the vocabulary, they say that's too difficult. They look at the concept and they say this is very strange, we don't really understand it. And I think to myself, why is it when I go, say for instance, to the UK, you go to the shelves for 9-year-old books and you see the Harry Potters, they're this thick, you know?
Yes.
And you come here and they're saying it has to be staple bound if it's for 12-year-olds because that's the level they're at. We're competing for the same jobs, you know, so in future those kids will wonder why are jobs being outsourced, you know, well, and so many jobs already are being outsourced.
There's a report in the newspaper this morning talking about expatriates in the country that's meant to cause an uproar, but like you're saying, if we don't have people who are reading, then the jobs won't be there. You brought up the issue of Joseph, and I want us to talk about the Kenyan author. Are we seeing a rise in the Kenyan author? Have we stagnated? How are we doing when it comes to that?
I think on the publishing side, there are very many interesting developments. I'm particularly excited by, for instance, if you're an adult, the Jalada. Jalada is a literary journal. I think they're launching their they've just launched their 4th issue, which is the language issue, which is interesting because they're publishing, you know, they've published a collection of short stories and in different languages and then had a translation. But they've done again online. Then there are all these young writers who are writing fiction. Kenya is, I don't know, in fact not just Kenya, I'd say the East African scene has really and I know a lot of young authors, I think, who will be making over the next few years, really making a splash when they start producing now longer manuscripts, because those seem to be the ones that the world talks about.
Yes. And I was going to get to that. Is it, you know, is writing worth it in the sense that, is it going to give me money at the end of the month? Is it going to pay my bills at the end of the month? Coming from a point where the people who have been examples to us are, for example, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who we came to know about much later on, you know, in life. So is writing now becoming that thing we can do that will earn us money?
If you're serious about writing, in other words, you're not doing it just because writing is a career or writing as an income source, then you have to dedicate to it the same way that you dedicate yourself to doing the job that you do. And in that case, I have no doubt you can make a good income from writing. Especially online, there are so many opportunities and calls for writers, and writers and editors. There's a profound shortage of editors in Kenya. It's almost impossible to be an editor and not have a well-paying job. You know, so I think what has happened is people narrowed their eyes and they think that writing is only writing like Ngugi wa Thiong'o. There are many ways of writing. There's a shortage of writers to write non-fiction that is not curriculum. So popular science, popular biology, you know, about the human body, about the spirit, you know, about emotion, about development. If you think, for instance, the American dream, you know, and what it stands for, land of opportunity, was coined by an author, you know, and it's become the underlying, you know, philosophy of a nation that has attracted people from all over the world trying to break into it because of this dream that was set out that then became the foundation. And I feel that in Africa what has happened is we don't have people who are yet inspired, and that's what we need to do to our writers. Inspire them to stop putting writing in a particular box. Biko makes a very good living as a writer, and there are many others, you know, like on online sites, you know, online, who are making a really good living as an author. As the writers that are published and their books, you know, do well in schools, etc., make very good living. The Kiswahili authors, you know, the ones who, because there's such a shortage of good Swahili text, really make a good living. So I think it's just open your eyes, and like in any other fields, look for the opportunity, and it's there.
Okay. Story Moja Festival, is already taking place. It's ongoing. Tell us more about it this year. What are we expecting? You know, what's exciting? What's the catchphrase this year?
I think the whole festival is exciting. So it is 5 days, the largest book party in Africa. I understand our festival is now the largest.
Wow, nice. Nice.
It's happening at the Arboretum. The first 3 days is it's a schools program, and then in the evenings or late afternoons we have master classes from the visiting and local artists. We have artists, performers, dancers, we have musicians, we have writers from 15 different countries who come. We're particularly interested in telling and interrogating the African stories. So for the first time we have countries like Burundi, Rwanda have come on board, we've got South Sudan, we've got Somaliland, we have South Africa, we have, and then further afield, USA, Britain, Czech Republic, we have very many countries that are represented, and Uganda. In terms of the new things that are happening this year, the theme is articulate, trying to get people to really articulate their thoughts, their dreams, their vision for our continent. And some of the, I think, highlights is the Wangari Maathai Memorial Lecture, which will be delivered on Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning at the Arboretum, and it will be delivered by the chief scientist of the UN, who I'm very happy to say is a woman.
Oh, nice.
Her name is Jackie McGlade, and one of the things she'll do is she'll launch, formally launch a petition that we've started to change Nairobi's Limuru Road to Wangari Maathai Road.
Nice.
And I hope to get a lot of, you know, support from the public. So if you're watching this, please go online to Story Moja Festival and sign the petition.
Yes.
And it's part of a growing, you know, sort of a growing, I think, need for female recognition in public spaces. So we're saying, how come only 6 roads in Nairobi are named after women? How come only 7 roads outside of Nairobi are named after women? What about the stadiums and the monuments? And you know, so just, and yet there are all these incredible women who've contributed to the development of Kenya. And I think as writers, those are the questions we need to be asking, because they influence how the next generation grow up and see themselves and see that their place is going to be recognized.
All right. Let me read a few SMSs.
Yes.
There's okay. What the speaker is saying is very true. It is a passion. But gender, okay, I can't go to the same, but gender issues letting us down, which you have brought up quite, you know, well. A lot of people are asking, very interested for the children to start reading. I think we can repeat, you know, many are asking, I have a 7-year-old, I have an 8-year-old, you know, I have a child who's joining pre-unit next year. What books should I be buying for them? Okay, let me mention a couple of books. Like, for instance, one of the books we've published, it's by Faith Gatini, and it's called Tithinda and the Wind Game. And Tithinda is a little tree that dances in the wind, but it's very unhappy because it can't jump like the rabbits and fly like the butterflies. And it's a book really about self-esteem. So its mother teaches it how to do something that only a tree can do, which is dance with the wind, you know, and it has a lot of fun. And
so the book is valuable in terms of the lesson that it teaches. But the most important thing, I think, for parents is to say, whatever book you read with your child, make sure that you don't turn the session into an exam. It's not a classroom in the traditional sense. Reading is, you learn subconsciously. So the more fun you have with it. So make it funny, use voices, don't make the session long. So if it's a very young child, you know, you could start from 10 minutes to half an hour. You'd be surprised. A 1-year-old, you'll be reading with them and literally have to point and say that's the word and ask them, what is this picture saying?
Yes.
Like that.
Yes. And
then you'd be surprised when they're 3, they start reading it to you. And maybe they can't actually read, but they know those are the words on the page, that's what they represent, and that's what that picture on that page, the words under it always say this. And over time, by the time they're 4, they're able to actually start making sense. Oh, so that's the word I, will, you know, like that. So they will learn subconsciously. But if you don't make it fun, then they start saying, this is just another way of cramming. It's uncomfortable. It's just like studying, you know, really hard. And it's just an extension of the school classroom, which is not seen as something positive.
So for you, it's make it fun. Make it fun. Make the experience
a lot of fun. And go into the bookshops. There's so many books. I could give you, you know, Land of the Kitchen by Oluoch Madiang, where the Sufuria fights with the Mwiko. Read it as a story. You know, it was told by Eric Omondi, who won one of our storytelling competitions back when he was a Daystar student, and it launched his career. You tell that story, Land of the Kitchen, as, you know, buy it in the bookshop and share it with your child. You'd be surprised. They're laughing, but they're also learning. And they'll ask you questions, and it's a way of bonding with them, of spending time with them. So I always say, no matter how busy you are, find 10, 20, 30 minutes. Don't make it longer than 30, otherwise it's punishment.
Then it's cool. Okay. A lot of people asking how they can connect with the Story Moja, and I'm assuming they just need to come to the Arboretum this weekend and come
to the Arboretum. The program today starts at 9 o'clock until late. Because we have evening events as well, and then the program over the weekend starts at 11 o'clock through to very late, because there's music and theater that happens in the evening, and the range of events, I know, like for men, he talks a little bit about gender issues, like there's a discussion on the future of men, you know, the challenges facing men in the 21st century, which is being moderated by Rongo Horton, and there are discussions around her story, moderated by Dr. Mshai Mwangola. There are discussions around, you know, discussions around just the role of literature as a way of propagating national values. And we have interesting panelists like Jamamus from Somalia, who runs the Hargeisa Book Festival.
Oh, nice.
Yes, and then there are very many sort of book launches, poetry. We have a medical doctor, Dami Ajaye, who's a poet. And I know if Kenyans are here, medicine poetry.
How?
And he keeps saying, it's my poetry that makes me a really good doctor.
Nice. You know? All right, so it looks like it's all set out. And if you want to learn more about books, I think the Arboretum is a place to be. Scarlett, thank you so much for coming this morning and for sharing with us your passion on books, and hopefully we've convinced someone to pick a book and start reading. Pick a book.
Pick a book today.
Yes.
Story Moja. Google Story Moja, and you'll find a list of books to read.
All right, then. You're watching the Power Breakfast Show. Don't go too far.